Hey folks, and welcome back to the Psychedelic Podcast by Third Wave, where we explore how the safe and responsible use of psychedelic medicines catalyzes individual and collective transformation. I'm your host, Paul F. Austin, and today I'm joined by our new co-host, Joseph Anew, the Institute Director of Third Wave's Psychedelic Coaching Institute.
I believe the physical body is a reflection of the mind, the emotions, the spiritual body, the connectedness, the sense of belonging. And sure, we can go to physical therapy and get things, out of emergency mode. But when we look at static postures and our breath, it is intimately related to what's happening kind of between the ears and behind the eyes. And I think that psychedelics have a way of cracking that wide open.
Hey listeners, this is Paul Austin, founder and CEO at Third Wave, and welcome back to the Psychedelic Podcast. Today we are going to talk about how psychedelics can help to repattern our physiology, emotions, and behavior, and also look at how psychedelics help people reconnect with nature and their own primal selves. Today we have Joseph Anew on the podcast. Joseph Anew is the Institute Director of our brand new Psychedelic Coaching Institute and the new co-host of the Psychedelic Podcast. Joseph was a practitioner in our third cohort for our coaching certification program, and we got to know each other quite a bit through that. I found out about his extensive professional career in training, programming, and we just started to talk about what it would look like for him to step into the Institute Director role here at the Psychedelic Coaching Institute. And then naturally, as you'll learn more about in the podcast, Joseph himself has hosted a podcast for the past several years, recording several hundred episodes as part of that podcast. So it felt like a natural flow to invite him to become a co-host of the Psychedelic Podcast. And Joseph will be handling and talking a lot about the physiology of what it means to become transformed through psychedelic use. And in the coming weeks, you'll hear quite a few episodes from practitioners who have graduated from our training program, exploring the work that they are now doing out in the world as a result of going through this transformative program themselves. And to make sure you never miss any of these episodes, follow the show wherever you listen to podcasts or subscribe to Third Wave's channel on YouTube. As always, you can go deeper into this episode with full show notes, a transcript, and any links that we mentioned in the conversation. Just follow the link in the description or head to thethirdwave.co/podcast and scroll to episode 211 with Joseph Anew. And if you want to learn more about what we're up to at the Psychedelic Coaching Institute, just go to psychedeliccoaching.institute. That's psychedeliccoaching.institute. So on this show today, Joseph and I go deep into Joseph's evolution from competitive fitness to the Psychedelic Coaching Institute, his role in Spartan Race, how he became involved with it and helped it to grow over 7 years, the surprising parallels between psychedelics and obstacle course coaching, why at the Psychedelic Coaching Institute we host intensives in the jungle, how psychedelics help to repattern our physiology, emotions, and behaviors. Joseph Anew is an outside-the-box thinker, holistic health expert, and personal transformation coach. Across the last 20 years, he has helped thousands of people transform their physical and emotional health through coaching, podcasting, and live events that focus on mindset, exercise, sleep, nutrition, breathwork, cold immersion, and most recently, psychedelic medicine. Joseph is also the founder of RUNGA, an experiential health and wellness company that hosts transformational live events and online coaching program. And prior to that, Joseph spent 8 years as an executive at Spartan Race, where he was head of the company's fitness and sport departments. Now, keep in mind, we are doing a lot of incredible things at our private community at Third Wave, and that's found at community.thethirdwave.co. So if you're interested in continuing the conversation after this episode and joining us in the community, just go to community.thethirdwave.co. All right, that's it for now. I hope you enjoy my conversation today with Joseph Anew. Let's start with your why, Joseph, because I think the audience, the people who are listening, they want to know you, they want to understand you, and I'd love if you could just start with the story of why did you choose to become professionally involved in the psychedelic space.
Hey, thank you, Paul. I wasn't sure what shape it was going to take. As you mentioned, my background, I've been a health and wellness, fitness, nutrition coach for 20 plus years at this point. And the journey there it started very much in body fitness and running marathons and triathlons and getting really physical. And then what tends to happen, and I've seen this in many other folks as well, is like you get super fit, but you realize you're not as healthy as you could be. And then you start getting really into health, and that's where food comes in. And eventually you start getting into wellness and spirituality because you're constantly trying to kind of up level and constantly trying to like fill in gaps and make yourself, all that you can be. And for me, I thought I was there. I was healthy, I was fit, I ate well. And really after the passing of my father and the birth of my son, which kind of happened in a short period of time, I realized a pretty serious hole in my, in my heart. Call it a God-shaped hole, call it a search for meaning. I was also kind of getting into my mid-30s, which is a common period of time and a common age for men to kind of have a little bit of a spiritual awakening. So after years of kind of saying, I can go anywhere I want to go with my breath and all this, I decided to step in first with microdosing and then with higher dose experiences. And it completely changed my life. It completely changed my sense of being. It helped me heal many wounds. I had a really pretty challenging childhood that I won't kind of get into, but I had a lot to process. And I didn't even realize that. And so it opened up these incredible doors and really kind of just completely changed my body, my mind, and my spirit, my ability to be a husband and father and professional. And so then I decided after this transformation to sign up for your certification program. I was a third wave, I bought the Mushroom Grow Kit a couple of times. I, signed up for the certification program. And over the course of that program was really when I began to be called to contribute to this. As you mentioned, I built a multi-level certification program over at Spartan Race. I've, built out chains of fitness franchises. I've coached people in all realms and walks of life. And so I was feeling really called. And then, as we started to connect, I started to realize that, wow, stepping into this work, I thought maybe I would step into it professionally as a coach. As you mentioned, RUNGA is a health and wellness business. I didn't know if I was going to just, drop mushrooms into that business and, bippity boppity boo, here we go. We've already got a really nice container. But as I started to learn more about these medicines and really develop that reverence, I started to want to kind of shoot into a little bit of a different realm. And that's when you and I connected. So here I am, it was so exciting to hear what you were doing at the time at Third Wave, where you had this idea of creating an institute. And it was just so up my alley. It really it was like bringing all 20 years of my experience into one building, basically, right? One shop where we do teach the skill of psychedelics. And we also support those coaches, and in our lessons and lectures and future content, how do we integrate all these non-psychedelic modalities that have been my life prior to psychedelics into a professional coaching container where coaches can now use those things to prep and integrate people after high dose experiences. So happened pretty naturally. It was unexpected, but I'm very grateful for it.
Let's talk a little bit more about your time at Spartan. I mean, I think from my memory, you were maybe the 7th or 8th hire at Spartan in 2011. You ended up committing to them for 7 years, helped them grow into several hundred or a few hundred employees, build out their training program, help them to get on NBC, on primetime television for the Spartan Race. What was the most meaningful aspect of that work for you at Spartan and helping to build that out over 7 years?
What was funny? So in college, right, I got really into endurance. I got really into fitness. I got really into running as far as I possibly could. And when I graduated college in 2007, I had this sort of burnout, this sort of feeling like, I don't actually love this. I'm addicted to it, but no one enjoys running for a full marathon where your watch is beeping at you if you run too slow or you run too fast, and you got to drink out of this bottle every 45 minutes and this bottle every 15 minutes to keep your electrolytes in balance. Like, no one likes to, unless you're super type A, that gets pretty monotonous and pretty old. And so I was realizing I was pretty burnt out from not the activity, but just everything that goes into competing in such a sort of predictable sport, right? Like the type of people who run Ironman are not varied. Like 85% of them are the exact same DNA, the exact same type of person. And so I had a couple of years of sort of contemplating, what I was going to do with my physical body, because it's so important for me to stay physically active. And I was so burnt out from that monotonous endurance stuff that I had a college professor call me and say, hey, that this race that I had turned down year after year after year, I'm never doing that. It's called the death race. I'm like, I'm never doing the death race. And my college professor, who I was good friends with, calls me up. I still remember where I was driving, and he says, hey, the lunatic that runs that 24-hour death race, he's doing a race. It's 5K. It's going to be a ton of fun. We're going to jump over fire and run through the mud. And I'm like, I'm totally in. Like, that's what I need. Like, no heart rate monitor, no like water bottle, no like sodium concerns, just sunshine, mud, earth, forest, nature. And it was life-changing. And it's similar. The feeling I got from that was similar to psychedelics in that you do this physical experience. You put your body through this intense, just physical crucible, and there's an overflow that goes into your spirituality and your how you eat, how you think, how you sleep. There's such a powerful force coming through your physical body that you get all of these other benefits that are just coming from the overflow. And that's the same feeling I got from psychedelics. Is like you have this significant emotional, spiritual experience. And suddenly, and I know this is your story, Paul, after your LSD experience, you started wearing Vivo barefoot shoes. You started eating a little cleaner because you started to see the connectedness and the way this all works. And so I wanted to help bring that to more people. So immediately we got involved. My professor and I both at the same time. We started to build out content, ended up becoming a certification program because so many trainers and coaches, just like today in the psychedelic space, were saying, what do I do to prepare somebody for this insane event? Like I didn't learn how to throw a spear in my certification program to be a trainer. I didn't learn how to this guy's got barbed wire in his butt and he's getting hit with a fire hose. Like this is just out of scope for any trainer. So we started to build out more and more, ended up being a multi-level certification program. As you said, we sort of focused on the weekend warrior for many years. Well, by about 2013, there was one guy in particular that really kind of that really drove this for us. His name was Hobie Call. We're like, this guy's trying to win. So it's like this event is enough as it is. Like just crawling across the finish line is to be celebrated. But we had this guy that was he was a 2:15 marathon runner, and he was winning these races by margins of 35, 40 minutes. And we were like, wow, so we're developing a professional sport now. So around 2014, 2015, I shifted. We had, a couple million people a year, average Joes, weekend warriors, people that are on weight loss journeys, cancer, recovering from all sorts of things. We hedged on them in the beginning, and then we switched a couple of years later into this professionalization and this sport creation, which again ended up on NBC. If you go on YouTube, I think you can see me commentating the races like I'm, Joe Buck on Monday Night Football. It was a really crazy, exciting time. And it really, we met with the Olympics. We pitched the Olympics to bring obstacle racing in. It really ended up exploding. And, it was a wild ride and a massive personal sort of journey and transformation for me. So I'm very grateful for it.
I'm just thinking of could an ayahuasca ceremony ever be considered a sport in the Olympics? How many cups can you drink? For how long could you sit in ceremony? What would be a marathon of and I say this, of course, just to be clear to the audience, very tongue in cheek and very much joking. And yet I loved how you brought up these parallels between Spartan or the obstacle course kind of landscape and what's happening in psychedelics right now. Because a lot of medical doctors, a lot of psychiatrists, a lot of therapists, a lot of even coaches who have maybe been coaching for years and years and years, as you said, psychedelics are out of scope for nearly all of them. And so right now we're going through this massive cultural wide shift where people are having to learn about how they work with these substances. And, when you're in a clinical format, like a therapist or a medical doctor, there's a lot of regulations, there's a lot of rules. You got to do it this way, this way, this way, this way. But life is not usually that clean and neat. It usually doesn't have that many straight lines, and it's not that organized. And of course, that's why we've developed the training program that we've developed. It's really for folks who want to color outside the lines, so to say, who really want to do the pioneering work, who really want to do the building outside of, all of these rules and regulations, and have the courage to step forth and do this. And so I'm curious, now that you've gone through the training program yourself with the Coaching Institute, you're now the Institute director. What are some of those parallels that you're noticing and observing between where the industry is now with psychedelics and where, obstacle course industry was when you first joined Spartan, both the good and maybe some of the bad?
Yeah, great question, Paul. Well, I think that there's a certain in both cases, you're pushing the edge, right? You are willing to kind of step into the unknown in order to achieve something great, in order to find, and there's an interesting parallel where if you're on the path to find your center, you got to find your edge almost first. Right. And so there's a lot of sort of overlap there. And I think coaches that are stepping into the psychedelic space, it's almost like they know, just like running a marathon, like, as I said, the people that run Ironman are not varied. They're typically CEOs. They make an average of $248,000 a year. 70% of them are men. Most of them are tall and lean and slender. And one of the reasons they love Ironman is because you can calculate, all right, I got to swim this far, bike this far, run this far. So my training program is just chop, 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 chop. If I run this much for this long, this many days a week, I'm going to finish. It's just a math
formulaic in some ways.
Formulaic. It's very formulaic. But as a coach works with a client, and in my realm today, I've got 2 kids under 3. Birth has taught me that there is no formula. There is no... Nature does not really operate in that sort of what Britta Bushnell would call Apollonian world. So in coaching, a lot of times we're following similar sort of frames, and we're sort of like, creating these formulas for success. And sadly, they don't work. So when we look at things, and of course they work to an extent, but with the right client trying to do the right thing, or trying to carve out a new niche, or trying to create something truly amazing, they often have to color outside those formulas. And I will tell you, from years of standing at the starting line of a world championship, we were giving tens of thousands of dollars away. I could almost look at the start line and be like, okay, the guy that was counting how many pieces of broccoli and how many ounces of chicken he was going to eat at dinner last night, probably not going to win. The guy that's at the start line, ready to go, chilling, just knows how to get into his body. Like, he's got a better shot. And so what I'm saying is, sometimes at the very high level, you need to kind of let go of some of that security and really step into the unknown and find that edge, so that you can really see who you are, and what you want to create. And I think that that's what coaches are looking for as they sort of step into this work. And I guess the bad is, when people try to take that formulaic approach, they try to, I just had a call a little while ago where, you can't take your plans into a high dose LSD experience, right? It's like, it's just going to get you're going to go where the medicine wants to take you. And so there's a lesson to be learned there in terms of surrendering and allowing things to kind of take their own shape. And I think that's the, when people try to figure out a psychedelic experience or a Spartan race, that's where they get in trouble. You got to just see what you've got.
And I love that, because it also speaks to, and this will get a bit meta very quickly, but the training ground of psychedelics themselves. So in other words, when we're sitting in ceremony with ayahuasca, when we're eating 5 grams of psilocybin mushrooms, when we're taking, 500 micrograms of LSD, that is in itself a training ground for how to navigate uncertainty, how to navigate a landscape that we don't know what may emerge or what may come of it. And of course, the teaching there is always come back to the breath, always come back into presence, always come back into the body. And and this is a lot of what we emphasize even in the training program. It's like, yeah, folks think they want information. That's what they think they want. What they need is transformation, right? Because as a coach, when you're going in and you're working with a client, when you're working with, an individual, it's always personal. It's always of that moment and of that time. There's no playbook necessarily. And so the best coaches know that at the end of the day, they may do some assessments up front. They need to get a sense of how to navigate X, Y, and Z with a client. But at the end of the day, 80 to 9% of the job is showing up in presence and intuition and kind of knowing what to communicate, what questions to ask, where to guide folks. And that's, of course, where psychedelics help so much. So whether someone's a coach or practitioner who wants to work with psychedelics, or even whether someone's just a coach or practitioner who wants to become more developed, wants to develop more depth, wants to develop more wisdom, wants to develop more compassion, all of these things that I think are essential to coaching, psychedelics can act as a phenomenal training ground for that.
Right. And I think, it can't be understated just how much value, I was thinking back when I was at Spartan, I ended up running. So we were researching a book. Joe, the founder of Spartan, was writing a book, and we were researching this many years ago. And I read that the ancient Spartans had an annual foot race where it was 10 miles barefoot with your mouth full of water. And at the finish line, you have to spit the water out. And I said, wow, this is like, this is really interesting. So I, immediately put a sip of water in my mouth, went running, did about a mile. It was so uncomfortable. It was just so out of my comfort zone. But I was like, wow, this really taught me a lot about how to breathe. And this is, way before all this breath work and nasal breathing promotion and books on, number one selling books. And so I ended up working up 1 mile, 2 miles, 3 miles, 5 miles, eventually ended up doing a 30+ mile ultra marathon in Hawaii with my mouth full of water. And it was interesting how my ability to relate to the person that was running their first 5K and, the struggles they feel, when you're at hour 9 of, Hawaii humidity and you haven't taken you haven't opened your mouth in so long, people think you're a mute on the trail. They're confined. It was just such an amazing, beautiful learning experience to be that person just in silence for what was 10 hours. But anyways, I found my ability to being at that end of the spectrum, just so extreme, coming back to the guy that's running his first 45-minute race. It was like, wow, when he says I'm exhausted, I know how exhausted you really are. It's like you've pushed your own envelope. And I think that, in the psychedelic space, one of the things with our coaches that I just appreciate is the amount of experience a lot of them bring in or are committed to pursuing, because I think ultimately as you get into this space and you're helping people integrate and you're helping people, there's no replacement for your own personal experience with this stuff and your deep inner work. And I just think that that's just, we're so fortunate to attract just such amazing people into the space that really want to kind of take that experience and add just a layer of professionalism, ethical, processes, and it just learn about all the ways that all the things they need to help their clients navigate, whether it's, pharmaceutical interactions or whether it's other stuff, but it's just the sort of, commitment to excellence that people are bringing into our certification program is just, it's awesome. Yeah.
And what you're touching on is this idea that psychedelics are a skill, or the example that you gave about running 30 miles with water in your mouth, you had to work your way up to that, right? You had to do X before you could do Y, before you could do Z. And I think that's similar with what we're seeing in psychedelics, right? At this point, I've been working with psychedelics intentionally for almost 14 years. Psilocybin, LSD, ketamine, rectal ketamine, MDMA, rectal MDMA, ayahuasca, wachuma, 5-MeO. I still haven't worked with iboga or even peyote, but each one of those has a different sort of level of mastery that one is attaining to be able to sit and be present in it. And I see iboga almost as being at the top because of how intense and long it is. And yet, I wouldn't recommend that someone who's never done psychedelics just go smoke 5-MeO DMT right off the bat. There are plenty of people who do that, but that often can lead to a traumatization, a re-traumatization, a sort of not a fragile, a broken ego, a shattered ego, so to say, which can be difficult to put back together. And that incremental growth, right, over time is how we develop that skill both for ourselves, but as we're developing that inner skill for ourselves, working with this intelligence of psychedelics and plant medicines, we are in fact also developing a greater skill to hold space and presence for those who we're choosing to work with. And that's why I think this lens of psychedelics as therapeutic tools, while helpful for many who struggle with depression, addiction, PTSD, is incredibly limiting in terms of the full context and the full landscape of what these actually provide, and that the sort of myopic focus on psychedelics as therapeutic tools only offers a sliver of what their real potential is if they are used with intention and responsibility. And I think that real kind of capacity is everything that we've just been talking about, the sort of process of mastery, cultivating depth, presence. I mean, we have a faculty in our program, Jen Andruli, who's an Indigenous Alaskan woman, and she's like, yeah, at this point, I just would rather time travel and, telepathically communicate. Like, there's other realms, even magical realms, I would go so far as to say, that can be opened up through these medicines as well. And that is where I think the real fun begins in many ways.
Well, I love that because, so I did an indoor Ironman many years ago, and literally, it was a half Ironman indoors. And when we think about what we do, to frame this a little bit, is what we're creating is this non-clinical, non-medical, more sort of, as you're saying, this more earthly, this deeper, more transformational, more sort of rooted approach to the skill of psychedelics. I did this indoor Ironman where you did 56 miles on a bike, but the bike was stationary. You're just in a room. I literally have not been on a bike since. It was like it was the worst thing. And then you got off that and you did a treadmill run. So it was a pool swim right onto the bike on a trainer in a office building, and then a treadmill run. And it was miserable, awful. I have no problem being for 11 hours in nature in Hawaii with my mouth sealed shut, but to be in that white wall, I couldn't get where I needed to go emotionally. In fact, it just completely destroyed my relationship with cycling. So anyways, all that to say is, like, it can be limiting because there's a certain, if I was really preoccupied with safety or, whatever it might be, maybe my first mini approach is going to be in that realm where I'm, super safe and nothing can go wrong. I'm not going to get hit by a car or anything like that. But then it's like, sometimes people need to step out to really find that truth and find that true sort of North Star and that true sort of capacity or depth that they're looking for ultimately.
And it's why we host our intensive at Brave Earth, right? Which is a beautiful center in the middle of the jungle in Costa Rica. Because what we're learning as we do this training program is there's transformation in the medicine itself and the intelligence of the medicine, but it is exponentially amplified when done in nature. And there's actually been some really interesting research out of Imperial College that Synthesis, one of the centers that I helped to start, they did this research on showing that psilocybin, when done in nature, is that much more potent and impactful. And so I think what you're speaking to is like, how are we de-domesticating, de-industrializing even these psychedelic experiences so that it really feels like we're in touch with this primal, archaic part of ourselves that has been repressed, for potentially, in the Western lineage for over 1700 years, since the Eleusinian mysteries, and a lot of those animist and pagan traditions were eliminated by the Christian church. And so a lot of this retrieval right now that's happening is part of that process of remembering again. Because a lot of what we talk about is, we as a Western people have amnesia. We have forgotten what it is like to be connected and rooted into nature, and psychedelics are helping us to remember and reconnect with that.
Absolutely. I mean, gosh, I remember my when I was down at the intensive with you at Brave Earth, I mean, that land was just, it was, and it didn't, the interesting thing was I took a tiny dose and had a full experience. And so there's this, when you have that connectedness, it just changes every element of a protocol or of an experience where, you're really open to it. And I just think that, yeah, in a modern world where, cash is almost extinct, we're just getting completely just computerized, this sort of automatic society. And there's an app for that. And, we use GPS, even when we're going to the same grocery store we've gone to 6,000 times, right? It's just this, that sort of, it's refreshing, I think. And I think a lot of people are a little bit lost trying to figure out, what's missing in their life. And it's just this disconnectedness. It's just this sort of not being a part of something larger, because everything is just a screen now, or an LED bulb or something. It's not truth. It's not sun. It's not earth. It's not nature. And I think that a lot of times, to truly appreciate it, to truly turn down the program or the dopamine center or whatever it is that's like addicted to the modern world, I think microdosing, mini dosing, stepping into nature, high dose, it's like you're tuning down that new age program, that modern program, as you are reconnecting with that ancient part of you that really loves this stuff, this is what you were truly born into. So.
Yeah, Jacques Ellul wrote a book on this in 1954 called The Technological Society. And it was one of Aldous Huxley's favorite book about sort of like the onward march of industrialism and how it's destroying the human soul. And one of the core things in that book that he talks about is the trade-offs that we make when we prioritize convenience. We lose the capacity to be skillful, and when we lose the capacity to be skillful, we lose agency, we lose autonomy, right? And so a lot of this coming back into psychedelics, and there's trade-offs here. There's a balance, like convenience to some degree creates a lot of free time for us. It does create a level of freedom. And I think there is a way of, when we start to work with psychedelics intentionally, we become that much more aware of all of the ways in which we are still not free, and the sacrifices or compromises we are willing to make. Brave Earth as an example, where we host these intensives, that is an experiment that 23 people are living in the jungles of Costa Rica to create a community together, to get off the grid, to make everything fully sustainable. They're making trade-offs as a result of that, but they're betting that that's a better way to live. And I think what psychedelics are helping us to understand is the way we have been living the last 100 years is actually antithetical to human flourishing. And they're allowing us to understand, certain teachings from wisdom traditions, from nature, that need to be reincorporated for us to heal mental illness, for us to feel more connected, for us to live lives that are healthy and nourishing and have well-being at the center of them as well.
And it's the entire, it's what we call biohacking. It's you're just sort of you're just creating a more natural environment for yourself. And what we see is that when people biohack, which might be to just watch the sunrise with your bare feet on the planet, we see improvements in almost every measurable health outcome, right? Whether it's emotional health or cardiovascular health, grounding, just getting your feet on the earth 30 minutes a day has a huge impact, positive impact on the health of your heart. And so many, whether it's nutritionally, just, removing a lot of these sort of chemicals and food-like substances that were invented in the last 5 or 10 years and getting back to things that have been around a long time, health improves. Harvard just did a study. And I'm not suggesting that we go on the carnivore diet, but it was like 2,800 people onto this carnivore diet, this heavy meat diet, which, I don't eat that way, and I don't necessarily recommend anyone does. But what you can be sure of is that it's free of all of the sort of modern food chemicals and artificial sweeteners and all that. And the results were insane. It was like 100% of the people got off their medications. And this was almost 3,000 people. So a lot of what we're doing, even outside of the psychedelic space, is getting us back to nature. And just like, the folks down at Brave Earth, the 20 some odd people living, they're kind of demonstrating the option. They're the polarity. They're the kind of opposition of all that is modern. And after we go down there and have a transformational experience, it's like, okay, to what extent are we going to come back? To what extent, like what can I take from Brave Earth and bring back? Because I'm still going to, I'm not going to use candles because it's more natural. I'm still going to use light bulbs. And, it's like, where are we going to, how do we keep a foot in nature while we still use the internet and have a cell phone.
Yeah, it's like
that.
I love the Taoists. They refer to this as the middle way, right? And that's a lot of what we talk about with the third wave of psychedelics. What's the middle way between the first wave, indigenous use, ritual, ceremony, nature connectedness, and the second wave in the 50s and 60s, science, precision medicine, personalization, optimization, right? How are those two coming together, and what's the middle way between those? And I think that's a lot of what we're exploring. Now, couple more, we have about 10 minutes left or so. This is a slightly briefer episode than normal, but our audience will be hearing lots from you in the coming weeks and months. But I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this relationship between psychedelics and physiology, right? A lot of emphasis in the psychedelic space is on mental health and emotional health, right? And yet we know you can't separate the mind from the body. That actually a lot of things starts from a physical perspective. And this is in a way, even what's differentiated third wave, our training program, my personal approach is really rooting in the physiology. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on how do you think psychedelics help us become physically healthier? How do they help us to take better care of ourselves from a lifestyle perspective?
Thank you for the question, Paul. And, the physical body has been just such a passion of mine. I thought I was going to end up being like a physical therapist or something at one point. And I'm going to go back all the way to 2008. And I had a gym. It was called Ultimate Athlete. And I was doing a lot of post rehab for scholarship athletes, quarterbacks that are senior in high school that already have a scholarship lined up, but they just have to survive the season and they've got some like pain or whatever's going on there. And I had this one kid who I would stretch. I would work in concert with his physical therapy team and they would teach me how to stretch him. And, so he would come in to me like 3-4 days a week and I would do the whole program with him. And after several months, he had an avulsion fracture in his elbow, which basically means his bicep tendon ripped off a little chunk of bone from his forearm. Because when you're a young kid, your legs are often stronger than your upper body. And so if you're a throwing athlete, this can happen. And one day, after several months of literally getting zero improvement, not like a little improvement, zero improvement, he comes in and his arm is almost 100% better. And I said, what the hell is going on here? Did you see a shaman? Like what? No pun intended. He did not. He's like 16. But he said, after some digging, he said, look, I didn't do anything different, but my sister's birthday is tomorrow and I've been blowing up balloons for several hours before I came here. And I said, and this is what started just my obsession with breath, because I started to realize that when you get an injury and your scholarship's on the line and there's so much there that you go into fight or flight. You're afraid you're going to lose the college, the full boat. You're afraid you're going to not play football anymore. You're afraid of this. You're afraid of that. You're protecting the elbow and you're creating all sorts of muscular compensations in response to those shifts and those beliefs. And when he blew up all of those balloons, what did he do? He activated his diaphragm. He got his breath out of his upper body. He let go. If anyone here has ever blown up more than 12 or 15 balloons, you start you got to reposition. You got to, really get into it. So that's really what started this quest. The other seed that was planted around the same time is I worked with this really very not nice woman. And all of a sudden she came in completely changed. Completely inside and out changed. And at the time I knew she did psychedelics, but wouldn't tell me that because I didn't really know much about it, but I know for sure that's what she did. And that's probably what planted the seed so many years later. All this to say, I can say, I have witnessed and I have personally experienced a massive change in my physical body through energetic, somatic, breathwork, releases of all kinds, psychedelic and non. So I believe that many of the injuries, pain, recurring injuries, muscle stiffness, tightness, it's emotional holding. It's our beliefs. And if we look at the chakras and how, if I don't show up in the world fully, I'm going to kind of position my chest a little bit differently. It's going to affect my back. And so I believe that when you go into the psychedelic space, and anyone that's taken a high dose experience, especially if it's, MDMA or even mushrooms, you let go of all that. Your body can move like it's never moved before because it's like being in water, right? It's like you've let go of a lot of that trauma, a lot of that stored energy. And so I believe the physical body is a reflection of the mind, the emotions, the spiritual body, the connectedness, the sense of belonging. And sure, we can go to physical therapy and get things, out of emergency mode. But when we look at static postures and our breath, it is intimately related to what's happening kind of between the ears and behind the eyes. And I think that psychedelics have a way of cracking that wide open, where this is not based in any science I've read, but I would be willing to bet if you read like 85% of people are going to have back pain at some time in their life, like how many of those people are just too stressed out? How many of those people are just not happy? How many of those people are not connected to the natural environment? And so when we do reconnect people with themselves and the world we live in, a lot of that stuff falls away. So that's been a real kind of core piece of this. And then the last thing I'll add on, Paul, I know I'm getting long here, is, you know this, every day I get in my 40-degree jacuzzi, my plunge. And I think that there's an extremely strong connection with that practice and my ability to self-regulate, my ability to manage my emotions. Getting into 40-degree water every morning, no one wants to do it, but you do it anyway. And so that's that sort of dopaminergic, that like almost LSD microdose effect. But when we look at what that does is when you come out of that, your body is in a different state hormonally and chemically. And I think that practice is a really great precursor to high dose psychedelics, because you have to learn how to surrender in the discomfort. You have to learn how to let go. You have to learn to just be with whatever you're going through. And
how to breathe, to self-regulate even.
And how to breathe. Right. And how to breathe. It's all about the breath. And I know that's cliche, but it truly is. So.
Well, and I think the other point as well that you didn't mention that I'll emphasize is, psychedelics are incredible tools for shifting behavioral patterns. Right. And so a lot of people think that they have depression, but in fact, their diet's shit. Or, they may have struggle with anxiety, but it's because they're drinking way too much caffeine or they're not sleeping well enough. Right. So there's a lot of physical aspects that lead to emotional issues that if you get to the core of it, it's like, well, if you eat healthier, if you move more, if you get more sunlight, if you sleep better. And these are complicated things. It's not, I understand that just getting better sleep, there's a lot of stuff that's underneath that. But time and time again, I hear of people who healed these sort of repressed or suppressed emotions through working with psychedelics, which opens up an expanded space to actually change their relationship to the food that they eat, to the way that they move, to the way that they relate. And that capacity to make changes intentionally, I think, is another huge element of why psychedelics are so helpful for the physical self, the physical body.
Absolutely. We eat in alignment with our self-perception, right? So this is your LSD experience, and kind of what you're alluding to is like, it's like, I know in my own life, as an example, like I could drive by 6,000 Chipotles and not stop, right? But if I'm ever feeling down, if I'm ever driving in the car and I know I'm kind of out of sorts, maybe I'm too stressed out, maybe I didn't sleep last night very well because I've got 2 kids under 3, I at least glance at the Chipotle and consider it, even myself. So I've recognized that like there's an appeal. It's like if you're feeling down, you're way more likely to gravitate to a food that is hyper palatable or that is hyper caloric, that's hugely high in fat and carbs and everything else. Whereas on the flip side, the more connected you are to nature, like at Brave Earth, if they put like cheeseburgers, beer, and pizza out, no one would eat it.
No.
Like you're in this space. You just want to eat leaves and cucumbers and apples and stuff, right? It's just kind of what your body's called to. And so there's a lot to be learned there. And as you said, when you cure the disconnection and you give yourself some, whatever's lacking, self-love, self-compassion, self-appreciation, connectedness, you suddenly don't be surprised. And that is also the reason why without psychedelics in the sort of general populace, it's so hard to stick to a diet, and it's so challenging because you're not getting to the self-perception, and you're just trying to you're actually shaming yourself more because you're not eating the Chipotle, or you're forcing yourself to eat bananas or whatever it might be. So there's a lot there, but you get to the root of whatever is ailing you. And, there's a lot there. That's why Iboga is so big with addiction, right? Like, just rewires those programs.
It does. I mean, even neurobiologically, like Iboga has an alkaloid in it that actually interrupts the addiction pattern in the brain. And then from a psychospiritual perspective, it's just so intense that it like roots everything out, right? From an addiction perspective. So there's kind of like, again, it's like a middle way. There's two aspects and two elements of that. Well, Joseph, it's good to have our first recorded and published public conversation. I'm glad that we at least got to spend 45 minutes dropping in and talking about psychedelics, physiology, Spartan racing. There's a lot of ground that we covered here. Anything that you are kind of most excited about when it comes to the Institute and even co-hosting the podcast that you want to share with our audience as sort of a final message or some final words?
Yeah, well, I'm very excited about the Institute. As you know, we've got really grand plans, and it's going to be an amazing journey. Again, I just feel so fortunate both to be here and to be serving the people that are finding us and registering and enrolling for the certification program. I'm super psyched. In terms of my contribution to the podcast, it's awesome. As you said, I had my podcast for several years. I kind of paused in December last year. And now, being, again, kind of taking my 20 some odd years of coaching and wellness, health, fitness experience and bring it into this sort of realm that is so transformational in many ways. Every modality, whether it's breath or fitness, kettlebells, training, endurance running, ultimately, a lot of those pursuits were chasing the same thing. They were all trying to find that either that edge or that missing link or that sort of soul connection. So it's really neat to kind of take all of that and now come into this incredibly powerful modality that is just, as we know, the wave is like still coming to the shore. And just know that, being able to contribute that information is what I'm saying is like, as people step into psychedelics, I feel like all of those other modalities are there to catch you in many ways. And so I'm excited to kind of like offer that perspective on this podcast within the psychedelic realm. So the interconnectedness between all of these things that have been my life. So yeah, I'm excited to kind of bring a new twist and kind of, complement what you do on this podcast and the types of guests you'll be interviewing versus the types of guests I'll be interviewing. And so I think it'll be a really exciting journey for the audience.
Hey listeners, it's Paul here. I hope you enjoyed our episode today with Joseph Anew. Remember to head to thethirdwave.co/podcast and go deeper into this episode with full show notes, transcripts, and all the links we mentioned in this conversation. That's thethirdwave.co/podcast and scroll to episode 211 with Joseph Anew. And you can continue the conversation with us in Third Wave's community at community.thethirdwave.co. Tell us what you thought of this conversation. Let us know in Third Wave's community. You can sign in and find the Psychedelic Podcast in the menu. Leave us a comment there. And while you're at it, check out the rest of the platform where you can find support, meaningful discussions, as well as get access to education, resources, and providers across our global ecosystem. Sign up for free at community.thethirdwave.co. For next week's episode, Joseph will be interviewing a psychedelic coach who went through our training program at the Institute. Thank you so much for watching. If you want to stay up to date on the third wave of psychedelics, subscribe to this channel and visit thethirdwave.co, where you'll find plenty of free resources on the intentional and responsible use of psychedelic medicine.